Okay, I think it's about time for us to begin. It's already 5:03,
Okay.
so let's begin. So everybody, welcome to this, our second Writing Center webinar on motivation letters. We'll have one more after this. We'll have one next week. Next week it will be slightly different because we will do a Q&A. The participants in the webinar will bring the Qs and Shane will bring the As. So today we're focusing on motivation letters in general. I am Lori Enns. I'm the SSH Writing Center Coordinator at Nazarbayev University, where all students, faculty, and staff are eligible for one-on-one Writing Center consultations. So if you would like to have some personal help on your motivation letter, please go to our website and make an appointment in the Writing Center. Now, our website has not only, links to the Writing Center website, it also has lots of other great stuff as well. So you might actually find some information there that you can use. So we have a lot of good resources on, writing statements of purpose and motivation letters, as well as other professional writing. As we also have resources on academic writing, writing across the disciplines. And so if you are wanting to get into graduate school, if you are wanting to know more about writing in your particular discipline, we also have a new video podcast that's coming out that is going to feature researchers and writers in specific disciplines. And so look for this. This is coming out this fall, where each podcast will interview one expert on, or not expert, one researcher academic in a specific discipline. So wait for that. That's coming out as well. So to the task at hand, so this webinar is going to come to you from Shane Coates. Professor Coates is a faculty member in our department. He's been with us since 2018. He's in charge of our website, and he's in charge of the first year writing course. And he's also our resident expert on motivation letters, so it's fitting that he is going to do this lecture. And I think then, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Shane. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Lori. Okay, so I'm just going to get my presentation set up here real quick. Okay, does everyone see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So yes, as Lori said, I mean, this is kind of I don't know about an area of expertise, but it's my area of interest. It's something I really enjoy working with. Students come in, they're applying for these programs. Sometimes it's fairly clear what they need to do. Other times, they have a lot of questions. They're not quite sure which direction to go in. So this presentation is kind of a catch-all. It's going to cover all the general areas that you should be thinking of as you're writing your letter. I hope, and Lori, I promise this time I will try to keep it shorter. Last time I went way over the time limit, so I've kind of cut this thing down a little bit, taken out a few points or a few kind of additional things that I think I can do without. So hopefully we'll have some time at the end, and if you do have a couple of questions that I can answer, we'll do it then. But as Lori mentioned, next Wednesday at the same time, same bat station, I'm going to be sitting here fielding your questions. So if you have anything you want to ask, and it could be anything, I mean, seriously, ask me anything about motivation letters, of course, not but anything. But so any questions you might have, anything you're stuck on. I mean, so and it might even be possible that if you have something to show me, something briefly I could look at, maybe that too. But please don't bring an entire motivation letter. I won't have time to do that. So make sure you have your questions ready. So let's begin. So generally speaking, sorry, I'm just going to see if I can move this again. Generally speaking, when we talk about motivation letters, statements of purpose, we're talking about application letters. That's really what they are. And usually they're associated with a master's program or a PhD. That's usually, but not always. Sometimes if you're applying for certain undergrad programs or specialized programs, short-term, sometimes they require a statement of purpose as well. But this is where we see the most often for students who are applying for a post-secondary degree, something that they're kind of going up the next level in their academic career. Typically, they're formatted as essays, but not always. And this is something I'll come back to this in a little while. Usually they're going to be essays, but sometimes different programs will have different requirements. And another thing that sets them apart, sometimes they might incorporate what's called a narrative writing style. And I'll talk about that more in a second when I kind of open up the discussion about what you can include in your letters. The obvious question that everyone wants to know, okay, so what are the admissions committees looking for? What do they want to know from my letter? And basically, there are kind of two types of information they're looking for. The first set of information is very basic general information. Um, and it can be summarized in these four different types of information. Um, what you want to study. Okay, so what are you applying for exactly? The reasons for applying to the program. And again, when we talk about these reasons, that's a combination of things. We'll talk about that more in a little while. And it could involve a lot of different things. It could be what you like about the program. It could be your future objectives. There's a lot of different things that come into play there. They want to know your background and your qualifications, obviously, and your future objectives. So what are you going to do with this? What are you going to be when you finish all these, this amazing program that you're applying for? So that's the first type of information. The next thing they're looking for, typically they want to see these things as well. They want to know if you're prepared academically and professionally. They want to get a sense that you're not just doing this, without giving it much thought. You're not just kind of applying because you can't think of anything better to do for the next, 3 or 4 years. Do you understand the program? That's a big question. Are you fully aware of what's involved in the program, what they expect from you? Do you understand the requirements? What you need to have done before you even applied. And of course, they want to see if your qualifications match the program as well. That's something they're always looking for. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this. I won't get into this right now, but sometimes students worry that if they're changing from one focal point. So, for example, they do their undergrad studies in some particular field or in economics or something, and then when they're doing a master's degree, they're kind of shifting over slightly. They say, well, can I do that? Will that work? Well, it really depends on the program. It depends on how strict they are with the requirements. Sometimes I've known students in the past who've gone from one field of study into something, somewhat different when they do their master's, but it hasn't really been a problem. They've been able to slide over into another field. They just have to do some prerequisite work when they get there. So that's something that sometimes comes up. One thing that I can't stress enough: before you sit down to write your application letter, you have to do your research. You have to find out what are the requirements. And when we say requirements, I'm talking about the institutional requirements, the school itself, what kind of requirements they have, the department, do they have any specific requirements for the letters, and the program itself, what are they looking for? Because sometimes, some programs don't even want an essay. They want something different. They have an online application platform that they use. And so in that case, now ironically, if they have this type of this system where you're not writing a letter, you're just kind of you're answering questions, basically is what it is. And usually these questions are the same types of things. It covers the same kind of information that you would include on a regular statement of purpose or motivation letter. So it's just they have a different way of doing it. They kind of, they organize it in a way so that the information is clearly provided, in a certain format. Sorry, I need to see if I can change. There we go, that's better for me. Okay, so the key sections then. Now, typically you can plan around these 4 sections, and this is most motivation letters or statements of purpose are going to pretty much look the same thing. I'll just mention very briefly, the terms, the names motivation letter, statements of purpose, they're often used interchangeably. Technically there is a difference. I'm not going to get into that right now, but there is technically a difference between them. But most of the time, when a program is asking for a motivation letter or a statement of purpose, they're really asking for the same thing. And if you look at the details, there's actually information on our website about this. There's a WCP Extra, we call it, and it kind of outlines the difference between personal statements, motivation letters, and statements of purpose. You can take a look at that. It's on our webpage. And if you read through it, you'll discover that really a statement of purpose kind of covers everything. It includes all the information that the other two kind of separate a little bit. But as I said, ultimately, most institutions, most instructors, most representatives, they use the terms interchangeably. Most often, you're going to include this kind of information. So they're going to be looking for some kind of an introduction and background about you, who you are, what you're applying for, the basic stuff. They want to know your academic qualifications and your experience. What have you studied? What kind of courses have you taken? Do you have any professional experience that kind of links to your, what you want to study or what you're going to do in your career later on? Why are you applying? Why do you like the school? That sort of thing. And then a summary and a conclusion. So just to look at these a bit more closely, to give you some idea on what they might be asking for. So first of all, the introduction and the background. They want you to basically demonstrate your passion for your field of study. Now that word passion is kind of bizarre. It's a strange word to use here, but really it's why do you care about this particular thing? Why did you choose this? And you know, it, this is also kind of a time for you to show that you've given some thought to what you want to do in your career. I mean, you're not just doing a random, oh, I can't think of anything else to do, I think I'll do a master's degree. You want to show you really care about what you're studying, that is important to you, that it fits into some kind of a strategy that you have for your long-term goals. You could mention how you became interested in your academic field. So what happened? Why did you choose this? And I often, when I do this presentation live, well, I guess we're live, but when I do it in person with students, the last one is what led you to decide, why did you decide to choose for this particular, these studies, for graduate level studies? Now, I often have this little thing that I do. I ask students to briefly, close your eyes and, think for a moment, what was the moment when you decided you wanted to do a master's in whatever you're studying, or even go back further, think of the moment when you chose your major. What was that moment when you suddenly said, yeah, I'm going to study biology, or I'm going to study engineer, or I'm going to study, what was that moment? How did it come about? And sometimes there's a story behind it. Sometimes something happened to you in your personal life that made you think, yeah, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Sometimes it could be influenced from somebody else. Someone inspired you to do this. It could be anything. The important thing is to take a moment to think about what happened. How did I get to this point that I've decided to commit, the rest of my life, I guess you could say, to this particular career, or this area of study. So that's what we're looking for here. That's something you can include in your introduction. Question that often comes up. This is something that students are often concerned about. They want to know, how can I make my letter stand out? How can I grab the attention of the reader? Now, basically, there are different ways of doing this. One thing I would stress, though, you have to decide for yourself the kind of writing style that you want to use in your letter. Depending on the program you're applying for, or even depending on your own personal style, what you feel comfortable with writing, you may not need anything fancy. And this is where, instructors sometimes disagree on this. I've met instructors who kind of say, no, your motivation letter has to be very businesslike. It's a professional letter, and you want to just get right to the point. I'm applying for this program. Okay, that's not a rule. It's a style, and it's okay. Sometimes it might be more appropriate than using a different kind of style. I mentioned previously that sometimes you can incorporate a narrative style, and that makes it a little bit more personal. That makes it kind of more of a story about you, how you arrived at this point in your life and you decided to pursue graduate studies or whatever. So it really comes down to your choice. But if you want to go for something that stands out, that's attention grabbing, or something that you think make your letter more interesting, then of course there are different things you can do. But to reiterate, sometimes, and again, as I said, different instructors have different opinions on this. I've seen both sides. Some say it has to be businesslike. Others say, no, you have to tell a personal story. You have to tell a personal anecdote, something clever, something witty. These are not rules. I cannot stress this enough. These are not absolute rules. Sometimes we fall victim to the beliefs of other people. So if you get an instructor, if you get a tutor who says, no, it has to be this way, well, I'm here to tell you it does not have to be this way. Okay, there are a lot of factors that come into it. So decide for yourself. I would argue that, if you're applying for a PhD program, maybe being a little bit more businesslike might be better, because you've done a lot of research. You're already kind of in that upper, level of your professional studies or your professional career. So maybe making it a bit more formal, businesslike is okay in that situation. Master's degrees, okay, perhaps you can make it a bit more personal. Maybe you can kind of, highlight your own background, your own personal interests and that kind of thing. Basically, think about it for yourself and then decide. There are different ways of opening it up. I mean, so for example, here, these are some interesting ways. I just want to sort of pop back for a second here. A way of introducing or opening up your story, if you're choosing a narrative, would be to give a theme or a backstory of the essay. So as I mentioned before, if something interesting prompted you to decide to pursue whatever it is you're pursuing. If something happened and you woke up one day and you said, I want to be a doctor, or I'm going to be an engineer. Okay, if there's something behind that, if there's a personal story that you can add to that, go ahead. You can put that in there. And it could be anything. I mean, over the years, I've been helping students with these types of letters for maybe about 20 years now. And I've read some really interesting letters, some very interesting openings. And there are lots of different ways of doing it. Another thing you can do, if you prefer, you could offer a quote. Just find a quote from some famous or renowned expert in your field, or anybody famous for that matter, I guess. But make sure it's a quote that links to your own kind of beliefs about what you're studying, or a statement that kind of links to your objectives in your career. Those are the best kind. Don't just choose a random quote. I mean, it has to be something that has a meaning that will carry through the letter that you're writing. There has to be a connection. So just as some examples, I mean, personal anecdote, I grew up surrounded by numbers, and I always give that example because this was one that a student of mine created back, this was in Korea, this was a bunch of years ago, and she was struggling with how to begin her motivation letter. And so her first draft, this is what she wrote: I grew up surrounded by numbers. And she tried to explain to me, she said, I didn't know how to say it. I'm trying to tell them that, my whole family works in areas that involve numbers. My mother is, I forget exactly the details, but basically her mother worked at a bank or something. Her father, taught economics. Her brother was an accountant for a company. And so she said, my entire life, I've been surrounded by people who work with numbers. And so she said, how can I say that? I said, well, you just said it. It's perfect. I love that. I grew up surrounded by numbers. Leave it alone. That's fine. That's more interesting than saying, well, my father was a banker and my mother's. That's important, but as an opening, this is probably better. I grew up surrounded by numbers, and that's just one example. I should collect them because I've read such, some really, the best one, I think, the best one ever. And again, Laura, I apologize. I get caught in my own stories here, but the best one I ever read, the one that got my attention, was A Banana Changed My Life. And I thought, okay, you have my attention. How did a banana change your life? But the story was really about how she was traveling through Asia, and this little kid came up to her, and she had a banana. It was something she had for lunch, and this little kid came up and asked if he could have the banana. He was hungry, and it really struck her. She was very, very moved by this, that this little child would have the courage to come up. Didn't ask for money. He just wanted the banana. And so that kind of changed her perspective on, and she started thinking, what am I doing with my life? What am I going to study? And that led to her decision to pursue a certain field of study that she would not have ordinarily. Again, there's so many different possibilities. One thing I would say though, don't make it up. Okay. Don't try to make up a story because you want to sound interesting. That's not a good way of doing it. Be honest. Okay. If you have something, use it. If you don't worry. There are other options. Personal thoughts on your field of study. I mean, here's a quote that talks about literature. I mean, so this person might use this as a stepping stone to, how they feel, or a discussion of why literature is so important to them and why they want to study it. A quote, George Orwell said, men are only as good as their technical development allows them to be. We might want to change that. I mean, we want to update that a little bit. Mr. Orwell was living at a different time. We might say, okay, Orwell said people are only as good as their technical development allows them to be. That could be an opening to your beliefs about, whatever field you're working in, whether it's IT or engineering or anything. Just some ideas. Okay, the next thing that they're going to ask you for, I never know where to put this thing so I can see what I'm doing on the screen here. Qualifications and experience. They're going to want to know what you've done, what you've achieved so far. And this can be your previous academic work, just a brief overview. If you're applying for a PhD program, you're going to want to talk about the research that you did, the kind of research that you did in your master's degree as well, because it's kind of like, you go from an undergrad study, which is often a general, overview of your field. And then in your master's, you start specializing. And then when you get to your PhD level, okay, you are expected to produce some new knowledge. You're expected to, to contribute to academia by producing something original. So if it's a PhD that you're applying for, you could give an overview of what you specialized in for your master's degree. What were you studying? The last one, personal problems. I need to explain that one a little bit. If something has happened to you, if you've gone through certain challenges in your studies or in your personal life, you can mention this. But one thing to keep in mind, this is very important. if you're going to talk about your personal issues, make sure you talk about them in terms of how they shape your outlook and your perspective. Don't give a long, sad story about the terrible things that have happened to you. Now, I'm not diminishing that. I'm not saying I'm not saying these things are not important. I mean, as I said, I've worked with a lot of students over the years, and I've read and been told some incredible stories, some heartbreaking stories, in fact, of the difficulties that students face sometimes. Very eye-opening for me to think that, it's remarkable how people can survive, such hardships and still be able to become successful academically or professionally. But the key is, you don't want to seem as though you're trying to win sympathy. Unfortunately, we do live in a world in which people, well, frankly speaking, people lie. People will say whatever they need to say to get the attention they want, or to get accepted into the program, whatever it is, whatever their motivation is, they'll try to use sympathy to get in. Now, I'm not saying that any of you would necessarily do this, but it's a reality that we have to acknowledge. So people on admissions committees, if they're reading a long, sad story, they might be thinking, okay, how honest is this person being? I mean, what are they really, is this true? Does this really happen? And believe me, I have read some incredible stuff over the years. I won't get into it now, Lori, I promise. But again, it's something, instead of saying these terrible things happened to me, just kind of give a brief mention of something that happened, but then how did this change you? How did this contribute to your own objectives in life, your own perspective on life, how you feel about what you want to do with your career? That's the angle you should take. Okay, the next section, your reasons for applying. And this is pretty obvious stuff. Obviously, they want to know, what do you want to gain from this? And this is where you talk about your objectives. You talk about your future goals. What are your plans for the future? What do you want to be? Why this particular program? What do you like about it? Why this university? Now, for the first one, I'm going to give you a little bit of warning here. The first one is a bit of a trick, because what they want to see here is, have you really given consideration to your future goals? And, I've often seen students who say things like, well, yeah, I'm going to do my master's degree, and then I'm going to do a PhD, and then I'm going to teach at a university. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Now, that sounds very noble, and maybe that is your objective. If you end up teaching at a university, great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But what it says to me, when I read that kind of stuff, I think, you don't have a plan, do you? You've just come up with the first thing that came to your mind. And it seems obvious that, yeah, do a master's, then a PhD, that's logical. And so I'm going to be a professor. If that's the case, so be it. But I think it's more powerful. It's a better message. It's a stronger message if you can show them that you have a clear set of objectives for your own career path. You know what you want to be. If you can do this, it also shows that you understand the field that you work in. It understands what you're studying. You know the kind of jobs that are out there. You know the kind of specializations that you could follow. You know the kind of companies you could work for. And I think that's better, because it shows that you're taking this seriously, that you've really given some thought to this. So the choices you've made for your academic studies are shaped by this vision you have for the future. I want to work at this type of company. I want to do this type of work. So yeah, this degree will get me closer to that. It will allow me to do this kind of work. The last 2 points here, why this program, why this university, that's where you got to put the research in. That's where you need to spend time going through everything you can find about the university, the program, everything, the courses, the instructors, the teachers, and even the additional things about the school. Is there anything interesting that they offer for international students? One thing I always tell students, when you're doing your research, don't just research the department that you're going to apply to. Look at other things at the university as well. Go to the web page for their international affairs office. They often have a web page. They might have interesting things. They might have interesting scholarships that are available for international students, or they might have interesting activities like internships. It could be anything. I mean, the university I worked at before I came here, I actually worked for the Office of International Affairs, and we had specialized internships for international students. And there were a lot of students who said, yeah, I'm interested in this. I want to have a career that's going to be kind of internationally focused. So a chance to work at an internship in another country would be very valuable for me. So my point is, find out if they had anything like that. Take the time, do the research, learn as much as you can. Last section, this is your conclusion. Okay, now by the time you get to your conclusion, you should have said everything you need to say. I mean, you're pretty much done. So basically my advice, just paraphrase, summarize the main points of your letter. If there is, if you want to link it to your long-term goals, again, you could mention that, completing this program will put me a step closer to achieving my objectives in my career, whatever. If there's a narrative, if there's a backstory to your essay, you could link back to this. And that's always a nice way of kind of, bringing the whole thing full circle. You start with a statement of something that changed your life, something that maybe that could be your backstory, I don't know, or it could be a backstory about what you want to achieve personally. And in the end, you can refer back to that, how this will help you kind of, achieve those personal goals that you've set for yourself. Okay, so when it comes time to write your essay, here are some things that you need to think about. 4 steps. Number 1, read the guidelines. Can't stress that enough. Always find every bit of information you can find about what they expect from you. Some are great. Some universities, some programs offer very specific guidelines. It's so helpful. It's so nice when they do that. Some don't. Some just say, yeah, you have to give us a statement of purpose. No indication of what should go in there. Okay, so if that's the case, you can make a choice. Either you can go it on your own. I mean, well, you can use us. I mean, use the information we're giving you. Go to our website, look at what's there. That'll help you a lot. Do your own research. If you're still not entirely sure, you can try and contact the department or the school itself. There's nothing wrong with that. Write to them and say, hi, I want to apply for your program. I'm wondering, are there any specific guidelines for the statement of purpose? They might come back to you and say, nope, anything at all, just, any set of guidelines will do. Or they might have something very specific for you. So make sure that you know what they're asking for. And as I said before, some don't even want a statement of purpose. Sometimes it's an online application that you go in and here's a question and here's a text box and you type in your information or copy paste your information, really. So if that's the case, then that simplifies things quite a bit, but you need to know this. So again, do your research, find out as much as you can about the school, the organization, the program, the professors, the instructors, the courses, facilities, everything. Learn as much as you can. And this can be time consuming, obviously. And often when students come to the Writing Center, they're not applying for one university or one program, they're applying for several. So yes, you should actually look at all of these programs. Take some time, give yourself an afternoon, go into their website and look at everything you can find, explore, learn what you can. Find forums if you can. I mean, it's amazing how much stuff is on the internet. You can probably find forums where people talk about the program, where they give their own personal reflection on the program or the school or whatever. Look it up. Okay, just type it into a search engine. It's amazing what you can find. Personal thoughts on Nazarbayev University, School of Economics, whatever. Type that in, see what you find. You'd be so surprised the information that's out there. Read everything. Okay, learn everything you can. Gather your information. So as you're doing this, make notes for yourself, and make notes about the school, about the program, sure, but then make notes about yourself as well. Go back to the guidelines, your own motivation, your background, everything you've done, your skills, your abilities. Make notes on these things, your objectives. What do you want to do with your life? Where are you going with this? Make little notes. I mean, and just brainstorm for a second. Just write down anything, okay? Just whatever comes to your head, write it down. And then once you've kind of got a couple of pages of notes ready for yourself, scribbles or whatever, then you can say, okay, how am I going to organize this? How am I going to pull all this stuff together? Okay, that's when you start drafting. That's when you, again, if you want using the guidelines that we've provided here or the guidelines that we have on our webpage, start organizing your letter, start putting it together, see where all the parts fit, okay, and decide how, how it looks on paper. And again, there aren't necessarily rules for organization. The organizational strategy that I've shown you in this presentation is kind of a logical one. One feeds into the next, but even that's not a rule. Okay, there are lots of different options. Create an outline, start writing. So again, organize your information according to the sections. Sometimes students get stuck. They don't know how to begin writing their essay. Something that I've tried in the past, and I've experimented with this myself, and I've done it with students as well. I say, look, take a pen in your hand or sit at your computer, whatever you want to do, start writing. Just start writing whatever comes into your head. It's called free writing. But don't stop. Time yourself. Say, okay, I'm just going to write whatever comes into my head for 5 minutes. And it's quite remarkable how it's kind of weird when you start doing it. But after about 30 seconds, after about a minute, you find, wow, you start going off into areas. You start, coming up with ideas in your head. And at some point, you might go, oh, wait, okay, no, I got it. I know exactly how I'm going to do this thing, how I'm going to start. Fine. Mission accomplished. Now start writing your actual letter. Or you might just write for 5 minutes, then step away from it, come back to it later and say, okay, is there anything good here that I can use? And usually there is, usually. Full disclosure, most people don't do this. Most people never do this because they think it's time consuming. It's not going to be useful. It is useful. Okay. If you're completely stuck and you don't know what to write, try it, see what happens. How long does it take? This is a common question. Students are going to say, well, how long should I plan for? Well, the truth is it could be several weeks. It depends. It always breaks my heart when a student comes to me and they have a statement of purpose and they're struggling with it. Usually I look at what they've done and then I ask them, my first question is, when is this due? When do you have to submit this thing? The best answer is when they say, oh, it's, I've got 2 months to write it. Oh, okay, good. That's plenty of time. We can work on this thing. We can make it into something very special. When students say to me, oh, it's due this afternoon, okay, my heart breaks into 100 pieces. And then I have to say, well, look, I can give you some advice, some feedback, but there's not much more we can do. Maybe you've already written a perfect letter. That'll be great. If I read it and it's like, that's a fine letter, that's a great piece of writing, go ahead, you're good to go. But it's rarely the first draft that's going to be the good one. Okay, that's very rare. You're looking at a lot of revisions, a lot of thinking, a lot of rethinking. So give yourself plenty of time. And the key to good writing always is revising, revising, revising. Or you could say revising, then thinking about it, then revising, then reading, then revising, whatever. But it's a process and you have to go through that process. Get help. Okay, so we are here to help you. You can make an appointment. I think Lori has mentioned this already. Make an appointment with the Writing Center, go to our webpage, and come and see us. Bring the work with you. Even if you don't have any work, even if you're not sure what you should be doing, don't worry about it. Come and talk to us. But as I said, think ahead. Okay, don't wait until the last minute. So come talk to someone. If you can, get an appointment with me. I love working on these statements of purpose. I'd be very happy to help you. If not, we've got a great crew of people. We got a good bunch of instructors, and they can give you a lot of good advice on how to structure these letters. That is the end. Lori, how am I for time?
Great. Wow. I'm impressed at how you just ran through that. That's amazing. So now we have time for questions then. So so there will be a Q&A session next week, but right now, does anybody, you can send your questions if you have any through the chat or the Q&A, and we can address them right now to Shane. So we can do that now. If we don't get any questions in the next few minutes, I think what we'll do is we'll post, we plan to post this on our website, this presentation, and hopefully that will help.
There's also, just to jump in there, Laura, there's actually a lot of information on our website about applications, statements of purpose, and that sort of. There's a lot of information there. If you go to our webpage, assuming you know how to find it, if you go actually, I can run them through that. Would you like me to do that real quick, just to show them where to find stuff?
Yeah, how about that? Yep.
Okay, so let me share screen again. Where am I going to go? Here, I think. Okay, so and I hope you guys, are we looking at the SSH website? Is that what we're seeing?
Yep.
Lori? Okay, good.
We are.
So if you go to, just type in SSHNU and you'll probably go right to this particular site. So go to departments right here, and down here at the bottom, we're at the bottom because we're the best. At the bottom, click on that and it'll take you to our webpage. Lori, what are you seeing right now?
Writing Center program.
Perfect. Okay. So this is our webpage, and we've got one of the snazziest web pages at the university, if I do say so myself. You're going to want to go here for students, and you can also go through here if you want to. Right here for students, just click on that if you want. So we'll do it this way for students, and then you get a nice little menu of things right here. You're going to want to go to writing resources. That's what you need. So writing resources will take you here. Now you select the kind of thing you're working on. So for you, if we're talking about motivation letters, you want application letters and resumes. Click on that, and that'll take you to this page. Another menu, I apologize, but what can I say? We've got a lot of good resources here. Click on statements of purpose, motivation letters, and that'll take you here. Here is where the good stuff starts. So right here we have, this is an essentials guide. If you click on that, it's a PDF, and this PDF basically contains everything I just told you. Okay, and in fact, it's even better because it's got a lot of extra little details and stuff. You can use that to get started. Okay, have a look at it. I think it's a two-page document, and it gives you everything you need to start writing your essay. If you don't know how to start your essay, This will give you some advice. If you don't know how to organize, this will give you advice. It's all right there. This is a presentation, which again covers a lot of the same stuff I talked about in my presentation. This is something one of our colleagues did, Brandon. So this is right here. It's video. You can have a look at that. And down here, there are some other links to other outside sources. And these are some of the things that I've used in the past as well to develop my own materials. So writing the statement of purpose from Berkeley University, 9 steps to a great statement of purpose from Prep Scholar, and write a successful motivation letter for your master's from Master's Portal. You could take a look at these as well. Now, I mean, you look at these, but you're essentially going to find the same thing that I've already told you, and the same thing that's in our information. But if you don't believe me, you can have a look at those things. It's all right there for you. Okay, so I'll stop share again. Any questions? I'd be very happy to help you answer or try to answer your questions for you. As we said, next week I'll be sitting here ready to answer any questions. So if you want to drop back then, I'd be very, very happy. There's one that came up. It says, usually when I finish writing my SOPs, I feel like I have locked in my ideas and story. Okay, I can't finish that. I can see that.
Cannot start from a blank page. I always remember how I did this, but the hinders the sounds like writer's block. This it sounds like Asil Jean has some writer's block, and he's asking how to deal with it.
Okay. I feel like I've locked in my ideas, my story, and cannot start from a blank page. So I'm not entirely sure what you mean by revision. If you finish writing the letter, you know, I'm kind of trying to. I mean, this might be better if I was talking to you in person here, if I could see what you've done. But yes, it sounds like writer's block. And so depending on what you want to change, I mean, if you're talking about revising it, one thing I would recommend is after you've written it, put it away. Forget about it. Get away from it. Now, you need time to do this, obviously. When we're writing something, and this is true for anybody, I experience this all the time. When you're kind of focused in on writing something, your focus is on certain things, the content, the information, maybe the organization, but not the overall, not the actual text, or not the actual words themselves, or the actual, you know, whatever feeling is you're kind of expressing through your writing. I think you need time to get away from it. So what I would recommend is, okay, if you've come to that point, put it away. Just, you know, put it in a file somewhere on your computer. Don't lose it. Don't forget where it is. Give yourself a day or two and then go back and look at it again. Because now when you come back to it, you're going to have what we call fresh eyes. And, you know, it's kind of, you've kind of gotten away from that narrow focus, and you're going to see the writing very differently. 2 things will happen. Number one, you'll have a much better sense of how it reads and how it looks on the page, and even how it sounds in your mind. It's going to be different. You might like it. You might say, that's good. That's a great letter. Or you might say, oh yeah, I don't like the way that sounds. Now you have time, you can kind of make those changes. Number 2, another thing that's going to happen, if there are any mistakes there, any, you know, glaring typos or spelling mistakes, you'll probably see them, because now you're looking at the language differently. Now you're actually seeing the words. So you'll probably find any little mistakes or errors that are there. So I recommend give yourself some time and then go back to it. That's what I think would be the best thing.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. So there's something here from Vadim, and he's asking about the clichéness of that. So if they use quotes, it sounds like they're concerned, or Vadim is concerned that about using cliches. Like, will they be looked upon as students who, you know, are using old words? I'm guessing that it would be different if you would be if you're pursuing a PhD in literature as opposed to pursuing a PhD in engineering, for example. That might make the difference. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so my response is, the quote itself doesn't really matter. It's how that quote links to the rest of your essay that matters. So you could have the dumbest, most mundane quote ever, but yet if the way it links into the narrative, or not into the narrative, but into the text of your letter, if that's interesting and unique, then they're going to completely forget about the quote at the beginning. They're just going to see how this quote leads into something interesting that you're producing. Now, I do agree. I mean, you don't want to use, you know, overused quotes. And personally, you know, no, I'm not going to say it's up to you. Okay, so this comes back to something that I say to students all the time. If you're not sure about something, if you're worried about this, then you are in a position to say, you know what, I'm not going to use a quote because that sounds dumb. That sounds cliche. It's not my style. And that's fine. Don't use a quote. But if you want to use a quote, and as I said, if the quote kind of adds to, if it leads up to something important, or if it establishes something, then it gives a different meaning. The quote itself becomes different than just a quote. It becomes a stepping stone into someone else's story. And that's what makes it more interesting, I think. But to answer your question, yeah, it's always a concern. And if you're not comfortable using it, if you're afraid that it's a cliche, then my advice would be don't use it.
Yeah, I think it depends on how it works in your personal story. Like it might work,
Absolutely.
you
And I
might be
think
able
this
to
is
do
another thing
something.
too. When you get someone to read it, if you ask someone, and you always should, I mean, even if it's a final draft, get someone else to look at it and see how they feel. And if they say, yeah, you know what, that quote doesn't really make a difference to your story. It doesn't really match anything. It's just a quote sitting there at the top of the page. It doesn't really add anything to your essay. Then take it out then. Get rid of
Yeah.
it. Just start with a standard kind of, I'm applying for the master's degree program at blah, blah, blah university. And that's okay as well. Or your own anecdote or your own story or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's good. I think mostly now people just want to have access to the slides, and you were saying that like you were saying, we've got a lot of information. One more from Alexandra. What would you advise if I'm thinking of applying to a program that I've received a letter of rejection from after an interview last year? So
So
would you
reapplying?
go ahead and reapply to a program that's previously rejected you?
Oh, that's a good question. So I guess I'll ask you this question. What has changed in the last year? That's the big question. So, and in fairness, I mean, a lot can happen in a year. Maybe last year, this time, you just weren't ready academically. Maybe they looked at your profile. Maybe they looked at your background and qualifications, and they said, you know what, sorry, you're not quite there yet. There are numerous reasons why they might have rejected you. If they tell you why they rejected you, if they say you don't quite have enough of the right prerequisite courses yet, you haven't done enough of the right amount of study in this field yet for this program, then okay, a year later, maybe you have it now. Maybe you have this, the qualifications they're looking for. If they say, yeah, we're looking for people with a certain amount of professional experience. Okay, so do you have professional experience now? Have you done an internship, or have you done some kind of work placement that has given you experience? Like I said, a lot can change in a year. And also too, I don't think programs have a blacklist. I don't think, if one selection committee rejected you last year, I don't think they're going to go, oh, it's her again. And I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're just going to, look at what you've provided. Hopefully they'll be objective about it. They probably won't even remember, for that matter. But they're going to look at it and they will judge based on what you provide this time around. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. I mean, but going back to what I said before, what has changed? If nothing has changed, if you're still at the same level you were a year ago, if you haven't added anything to your profile or to your resume, then it's possible you'll get rejected again. And if there's anything worse than being rejected once, it's being rejected twice. So be careful.
That's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Spoken from somebody who knows these things. Okay.
I know
No,
I know rejection, Lori. I know rejection.
okay, I didn't mean anything by that. Okay, so thank you very much, Shane, for giving us this information. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Again, we have another webinar coming up this time next week. It's a Q&A. Bring your questions. We'll be sending out that Zoom link soon. And until then, you can have a look at our website. And good luck with writing your motivation letters.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you
We'll
all
see
very much.
everybody.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.